You're listening to Florida Capital Conversations, a podcast series brought to you by Holland & Knight's Tallahassee office. Each episode of this series will take a look at the many different aspects of state and local government through the lens of our experienced legal professionals. Our hosts, Nate Adams and Mia McKown, have a wide range of Florida governmental experience and offer a seat at the table to everyone who listens to these candid conversations.
Welcome to our Florida Capital Conversations podcast series. Today, our subject is the Florida Legislature, and our guests are Kim Case and Beth Vecchioli. My name is Nathan Adams. My co-host is Mia McKown. We are so pleased that you have joined us today to consider another important issue associated with state government affecting the business community and our daily lives as Floridians. There are none better than Kim and Beth to kick off our discussion. So let me begin with a very basic question. When does the Florida Legislature session start?
Well, thanks, Nate. It's good to be with you guys this afternoon. As you may know, interim committee meetings have already started. They started the week of September 20th, and they will continue to meet several weeks in October, a week in November, and then a week in December before the actual regular session starts on January 11th. And it's, of course, a 60-day session, and it finishes up on March 11th. And this session will be much different from last year because we were dealing with a lot of COVID issues last year in terms of large gatherings. And so the public wasn't really allowed to be in the Capitol. In some cases, we could not testify in person. So this year is going to be much like the years we remember from the past. The Capitol will be open to the public. And so hopefully it'll resume a regular normal session like we're used to in the past.
Yeah, it really created probably some interesting caveats for government in the sunshine with COVID, and that's a whole nother podcast that we could talk about on that aspect. I grew up in the legislative process. My dad lobbied, and one of the things he always said, I could hear him, explaining to his members, is that there are two things you don't want to see. You don't want to see how they make sausage, and you don't want to see how they make laws at times. And so, creating kind of organization to the madness and the chaos, how does that happen? Do they, who are the presiding officers and legislative leaders that kind of guide the chaos in this process?
Sure, absolutely. We've got some really good people in leadership. Wilton Simpson is the current Senate president. This will be his second session as president.
Kim, is that normal for them to serve 2 years or 1 year? How does that?
Yes, it's a 2-year term.
Okay.
So he's in his second year as Senate president. And he's also just announced that he's running for Ag Commissioner of Florida. And then the person who's going to come after him is Senator Kathleen Passidomo. She's the president designate, and her term will start in November of 2022. And then in the House, we have Chris Sprowls. He's the current House Speaker. And then Representative Paul Renner is the Speaker designate, and his term will start in November of 2022 as well.
Who decides who the leaders are going to be? Are they voted on by the different bodies, the different chambers?
Yes, each chamber has those determinations, and it's by vote. And the party that has the most, that has the majority that's in power, that will be the speaker and the president. And then you have the Democrat. Right now, you have the Democrats who are in the minority party, and so there's a Democratic leader in each chamber as well.
Got it.
Kim and Beth, based on what you're hearing, what do you think the top issues of the 2022 session are going to be?
Sure. I think there are 3 issues that immediately come to my mind: redistricting, the budget, and condo reform. So let's start with redistricting. Once every 10 years, the legislature is tasked with redrawing political boundaries of districts based on updated census data. Because of Florida's population growth, this year the legislature will get to draw a new congressional seat along with redrawing all the existing congressional and state legislative maps. The legislature just recently released new rules and disclosures that will be required as each chamber is drawing the new maps. And the purpose of those new rules and disclosures will be to try to avoid the partisan gerrymandering that is often, can come up.
What is gerrymandering?
That's the allegation, and Nate, you may want to take this, but that's the allegation that there are partisan reasons that go into how the different maps are drawn.
So trying to give an edge to one particular candidate or party, the way you draw the lines to try
Exactly.
to get. Got it.
Exactly. So how those seats are drawn will actually have a long-term impact on which party remains in power in Tallahassee. And it could also shift the balance of power in the U.S. House of Representatives. So one of the things that's always fun to see, and it usually only happens every 10 years, is we'll see a lot of members of Congress working the halls, going back and forth in the Capitol this year, because it's that time. It's redistricting for both congressional as well as the legislature. Another big issue is the budget. Florida's economy is bouncing back in spite of all the challenges that we've faced with COVID-19. We've seen unemployment rates fall to about 5% in August, and the tourism sector has rebounded with more than 31 million tourists visiting between April and June of this year. And the overall economic growth is expected to be around 5.3%. That matters because our economic recovery has had a positive impact on Florida revenue collections. Those collections are about $2.6 billion more than originally projected, which bodes well as the legislature crafts the budget for next year. There's also approximately $6 billion in unspent federal stimulus money, and that can be used to fill holes or fund priorities. Last year's budget totaled $101 billion, and I expect we'll see a similar number this year.
Hey, Kim, I know when we're talking about the budget and the different revenue sources that come, Florida, I think, is a little bit different from other states. How does Florida generate their revenue that our government then spends?
Sure. Unlike other states, we are dependent upon our tourism industry, service industry associated with it. So the majority of those revenues that are collected come from sales tax and property taxes.
So when we had a year like COVID where travel was restricted, that could have a significant impact on Florida's revenue and the state budget, correct?
Correct. And it definitely had, there was definitely an impact that was negative. But I think what you saw, obviously, from the governor and from his leadership is he wanted to not see the type of restrictions that you had in, say, California, New York, and he wanted to make sure that we could get businesses and people back to normal in Florida as much as possible. And that's why I think we're seeing the uptick in the economy, unemployment rates, as well as the overall economic growth.
And you mentioned it's sales tax and property taxes. I didn't hear you mention income tax. Florida does not collect state income tax from folks. So that's
correct.
Not general.
It's one of the additional advantages to living in the Sunshine State.
We hear so much on the federal level, right, about debt spending and how much they're in debt. Is Florida different from the feds as far as how they do their budgeting? Can they just spend forever, or do they have to make adjustments and actually balance a budget?
No, like families, they have to balance a budget. There's no deficit spending. They don't print money. So they have to tighten up their belt when revenues are less and prioritize. Absolutely.
Got it.
The other issue that came to mind was that we were all stunned by the horrific images of the collapsed condo in Surfside this summer. I think 98 people lost their lives. While investigators are still trying to determine the reasons for the collapse, I think you will see legislation brought forward this session that implements some policy recommendations from the Florida Bar's Condominium Law and Policy on Life Safety Task Force. The task force is currently looking at things like how often inspections are performed. I think currently, condos have to be re-inspected every 40 years, and how condo associations maintain reserves and handle repairs. Clearly, leadership does not want to see another Surfside tragedy. So I think we'll see some reforms pass the legislature this session.
I know, because you and I have talked about this before as it relates to property insurance. I know after the big hurricanes that we've had, they do task force and things of that nature. How long has it been since they looked at the building code? Because I'm assuming those are going to be some of the things like Kim was mentioning, inspections and things like that. I mean, it's been a while probably since that type of review was done. Is that correct, or am I wrong? Like looking at the building code, the number of inspections. I mean, is that something that's ongoing, or is this something new that we're doing with this task force that hopefully will make some corrections? You have any thoughts on that? Or
well, so I would say, Mia, the building code, various parts of it have been opened over the last 20 years and revised, mostly to deal with inspections and also quality of construction, and it's usually as a result of, say, a Category 4 or 5 hurricane hitting the state, and then looking at the massive damage that is done to people's homes and other structures, and then trying to figure out how to change the building code to prevent some of that damage. And so while I don't know off the top of my head if any of those issues, I doubt that when it comes to constructing condos that there have been that many revisions to the building code in the last 20 years. But I would imagine that that's one of the things we might see this year as they deal with the Surfside tragedy.
Because it was an older building as well, I think. So to Kim's point with the task force, Kim, I would think too, looking at how because I would think we have a lot of older buildings throughout the state of Florida, and condos in particular, how those are inspected, making sure that they're staying sound and safe would be something that I would expect to see out of this task force. Is that something that you're expecting, Kim?
Yes, absolutely.
Are task force normal? I mean, is that unique? Does the legislature use task force to help them form policy or to form legislation?
They can be used. In this instance, it was the Florida Bar who gathered a group of experts in condo, engineers, et cetera, to examine it, and then they're going to make recommendations to the legislature.
Okay, that's probably helpful, I would think, to the legislature to have some experts, right, in the field that are helping them guide policy and pinpointing some stuff. So hopefully that'll be interesting to see what comes out with their report and what action takes place.
Beth, what about you? What are some of the other big issues that you see upcoming in this session?
Well, Nate, I'd like to start off with a discussion on property insurance. A lot of homeowners in the state have recently been receiving either cancellation notices or non-renewal notices from their homeowners companies. In the last 6 months, we've had 2 property insurers become insolvent and taken over by the state receiver. And just on September 22nd of this year, so the first committee week of the 2022 session, the insurance commissioner gave a presentation to our Senate Banking and Insurance Committee and indicated that our property insurance market is dire right now, mostly because of litigation costs. And so I would expect that there will be many bills filed dealing with property insurance and also trying to tackle tort reform for property insurance. Another part of the property insurance space is our insurer of last resort called Citizens Property Insurance Corporation. The goal of that entity is to provide insurance for people who can't find it in the admitted market. And right now, because so many property insurers are either non-renewing policies or leaving the state or unfortunately becoming insolvent, Citizen has been ballooning. At their lowest point in the last many years, they were just below 500,000 policies. Right now, they're over 700,000. And the president of Citizens has indicated that it's very likely that sometime in the first quarter of next year, they will have over 1 million policies. That's always an indication that our admitted or voluntary property insurance market is struggling, because now more and more people are winding up in Citizens, which is not a good situation, because Citizens can issue and levy assessments against its policyholders and against everyone that has a homeowner's policy in the state of Florida. So I think we will definitely see some bills pertaining to property insurance. Citizens has already outlined several initiatives that they would like to roll out legislatively in order to shrink their policyholder count. So it's definitely going to be a big issue in this upcoming session.
It always is. It seems like there's always some kind of issue perking between the tort reform. And I would think, even though it's not necessarily related exactly to what we talked about, but with the surf side, that also impacts, Florida, our building, and possibly what kind of laws may come out of that. That could also impact insurance as well, because it's all tied up together eventually, I would think.
Our property insurers provide insurance for condos in the state as well. So they will be, and when the tragedy occurred, that building, I believe, had, 40 different insurance policies on it. And just about every single property insurance company paid their policy limits immediately in an attempt to try and cover some of that damage and for the loss of life. So yes, but I would imagine property insurers are going to be taking a much closer look at condos before they insure those structures going forward.
Which could create additional issues in this space that we had not even contemplated 6, 7, 8 months ago, for sure. All right, what other issues, Beth? I know property insurance is a big deal. What else for you? Are any healthcare issues?
Yes, I think we'll definitely see healthcare issues. Last session, there were several telehealth bills that we're trying to pass. They all kind of died on the vine and never made it over the finish line last session. So I would imagine those will come back, especially because during COVID, telehealth was used universally and is still being used in some cases by some providers, because people were not gathering in person together, including healthcare providers and patients. So telehealth is going to be a big deal. There are a lot of issues associated with that. There are out-of-state providers that may not be licensed in the state of Florida, and so we have to deal with those kind of issues. And so, yes, I would think telehealth would be a big issue in the healthcare space next year. Also, any lingering issues related to COVID. Last session, you may recall, there was a liability protection bill that was passed by the legislature to protect healthcare workers from liability if a patient or a consumer alleged that they were exposed or contracted COVID as a result of being, with a healthcare provider or worker. That bill, when the legislature passed it, basically was only good for 1 year. And so we're coming up on the expiration of that bill. So it'll be interesting to see if the legislature continues that for another uncertain time, given that we're really still dealing with some COVID issues.
Just to add to that, Beth, obviously we represent some healthcare professionals as well. And as you know, as the Delta started to creep back up, they've had to suspend some procedures that are not deemed, essential. And so anytime you do that, there's always the risk of what does that mean for the patient, and is there some liability? So I think that's really important. And it was really a necessity that they stop some of those surgical procedures, and but there's also some potential fallout. So I think it's really important that we have that protection in place and that it remain.
And it's interesting on that topic, Kim, too, because it can ebb and flow. And I don't think we're done ebbing and flowing. I know here in Tallahassee, they suspended some of those elective surgeries, and now they're starting to come back up. Other counties did things differently because they may not have had the same situation going on. So I think that issue is going to be around for a while as we continue, because COVID is still here and it's certainly not going anywhere. On the telehealth issue, Beth, I deal with that. As you know, I represent a lot of healthcare practitioners and practices and clinics. And they passed a telehealth bill, right, to allow it a couple of years ago. But the devil is in the details. Even a lot of rulemaking hasn't come forward. And you touched on it where you've got out-of-state providers. I know the bill that was passed last time, there's a registration requirement. And if you're from out of state providing telehealth, then you can't have brick and mortar. So I can see but there's still a lot of questions. And so usually in the process, and y'all tell me if this has been your experience, when they make a change like that, like to add telehealth, that's usually not the end of the legislation. That for a couple of sessions after, they continue to come back through and may have to address, because sometimes there were unintended consequences or things that come up that they've got to address. So I think that's one thing that's kind of neat about the legislative process is its ebb and flow, and it's basically a living, breathing creature.
Absolutely.
One of the things they were trying to add last session to the telehealth bills that failed were whether or not a provider using telehealth can actually prescribe opioids and certain controlled substances. And because there was, during COVID, you can imagine doctors were not seeing patients, but patients needed, some sort of controlled substance, maybe to recover from a surgery or something. That was a problem in the original telehealth bill. So there are, yes, as you point out, Mia, unintended consequences, and it'll be fine-tuned and tweaked until they get to a good product.
And I do think if there's anything good that came out of COVID, to some extent, the importance of telehealth and how it can work effectively and be cost efficient for the patients and for the providers. I think we learned a lot through that by the different agencies, whether on the federal or state level, allowing the practitioners to do that on an emergency basis. And so I think we were able to learn a lot and get some guidance from that, which hopefully can help the state to continue to craft good, safe legislation in this space.
Kim, all this talk about telehealth and insurance, what I'm really interested in are birds. And in particular, I'm interested in mockingbirds. Can you tell us a little bit about this kerfuffle involving the Florida state bird?
Sure, happy to do that. That's one of those fun issues, frankly, that we'll enjoy watching and hearing the debate. Senator Brandis has filed a bill that removes the mockingbird as the official state bird. There are 4 other states that have the mockingbird, and frankly, he's outraged. It should be something that is unique to Florida. So I would say look for the pro-Mockingbird coalition to spring into action to defeat the bill. Perhaps we'll see a Scrub Jay coalition to advocate for the passage of the bill. And I think you can already see, the media is having fun with it. I just looked at some headlines related to the bill. Here are a few. Feathers fly over state bird, or state bird battle takes flight, and out of the nest, lawmaker wants state bird ousted. So Senator Brandis is term limited, finishing up his last session. So I think it'll be fun to watch him with that bill.
Let me ask you too, either one of you feel free to respond, but look, if I'm a Floridian, I have a business, maybe I have a particular concern that I think requires legislative change. If I was interested in doing something about that, exactly what would I do?
Well, I would say that you would contact a lobbyist like me and Kim and talk about the issue and try and frame it and identify what the problem and solution should be. And you should do that. If you want to pass the bill for the 2022 session, you should be doing that now, because all of the hard work is usually done during committee weeks and preparing for committee weeks. Once we get into the 60-day session, things fly pretty quickly. So you should be forming, a coalition of supporters and identifying who your antagonists might be so that you can address any issues they may raise. But now is the time to be having those discussions.
Texas, it's gotten so much attention about their abortion law that they passed, and which supposedly it might even make it to the United States Supreme Court this next session. Do you expect any emotionally charged, super high, what I would call, nationally focused issues? Do y'all expect anything like that to be taking place this next session? I mean, there's already a lot on the plate with redistricting and things of that nature. Are there any other hot topic, sensitive issues that might garner some national attention that you might expect to show up during the legislative session?
Sure, Mia. I think one issue you already mentioned that will garner significant media attention and generate protests will be the Texas-style abortion bill that's already been filed in the Florida House. Representative Barnaby is sponsoring the Florida Heartbeat Act. As it's drafted now, it will allow abortion until detection of a heartbeat, which is about 6 weeks into a pregnancy. The bill does include exceptions for rape, incest, domestic violence, human trafficking, but currently, Florida law bans abortions after 24 weeks as opposed to the 6 weeks, which is in the legislation, except in cases of medical emergencies. So I think we can expect some significant debate on the issue that will be a tough one, that both chambers will probably have to grapple with. Yes.
And I'm sure that will, as you mentioned, probably garner some public attention from protesters, around the Capitol, which will also be interesting to watch.
There are already some protests that are happening throughout the state about the bill. Yeah.
When I saw that happened in Texas, I figured some of the other states, probably during their sessions, it wouldn't be too far behind to see how all that plays out. Beth, what about issues? I know Governor DeSantis has talked a lot about social media and tech folks and privacy issues, all of our tech space and data privacy. We all deal with that with the insurance regulators and healthcare entities that we represent, and it impacts all of our daily lives. Do you think there'll be anything going on kind of in a unique way, or is there going to be any effort to tackle some of those issues?
Yes, absolutely. Last session, Speaker Sprowls announced that one of his legislative priorities was to pass a consumer data privacy bill, similar to what California has already done and some other states, to protect a consumer's data. And in many instances, the consumer is not even aware that their data is being shared. However, as we discussed earlier, the devil's in the details, and there are always unintended consequences. Last session, there was a very large coalition of all different types of businesses from all different industries that opposed the bill that Speaker Sprowls proposed because there were so many unintended consequences, and to the point where it was almost impossible to fully comply with the requirements of the bill. Additionally, the bill was not a tort reform friendly bill. It had a section in it for a private cause of action. So basically to allow a consumer to sue a company that shared the consumer's personal data. So that was one of the main reasons why the business community objected to the bill, and it failed. But because it was a priority of Speaker Sprowls last year, and there's been even more discussion about data privacy this year, I think that we'll see that come up again, and hopefully they will address some of the business community's concerns about it, and we can pass something that is tort reform friendly, but also consumer friendly.
It's interesting. Y'all talked a lot about bills that'll be filed, that they died and they come back the next year. I'm just curious, out of the number of bills that are filed, do the majority of these bills pass? Do the majority of them fail? What has been y'all's experience and how that works?
Yeah, good question. Actually, only about 1/10 of the bills that are filed pass. Usually, on average, there are over 3,000 bills that are filed each session. And normally 300 or less bills actually make it over the finish line. So a lot of bills are filed, but the process works because it weeds out the public policy bills that maybe, should not pass at this time. And then we wind up with a much more improved bill and law that passes.
And Kim, once the legislature passes the bills, then that it still has another stop, right, before it becomes law.
Right. Then after it's signed by the officers, it's presented to the governor, and then he can either allow it to become law without a signature, he can sign it into law, or he can veto it. So a lot of times people think, oh, we passed the bill, it's done. That's just one stop. The next stop is we work on the governor's office and make sure they're clear on, what the bill does, what we're asking for. Same thing with budget. Once the budget goes through, he does have line item veto authority where you can go in and zero out something for whatever reason, doesn't feel it's justified to be included in the budget. So there's always work after session.
This is coming up on an important election year as well, right? So not only do we have redistricting happening this year, but we've got the 2022 elections around the corner. Sort of as our last topic for today's podcast, at least. How do you think that's going to impact this session?
Well, it's an election year. So along with the legislators, you have Governor DeSantis, you have the Attorney General Moody, CFO Petronas. They're all up for re-election. And then you have the Ag Commissioner, Nikki Fried, who's running for governor. So each one of them will have significant policy and funding initiatives that they'll want to see passed during the legislative session. So it's going to be a highly politically charged atmosphere. It's a high stakes game for everyone involved. And it just makes it more interesting for us to navigate on behalf of our clients. And frankly, since we love the process, it's really fun to watch.
It really is. And I lobbied many, many moons ago. And I got to give you guys credit because I do not have the patience for it, because I'm just like, cut to the chase. We need to just, figure this out. And there's a lot of, for good reason that, the dancing and the collaboration that people have to do to come to compromises on things. And as I think both of y'all kind of mentioned with some of the bills, part of it may get passed one year. You've got to come back and redo it again. And there's so much to it. And if you're not familiar with the process, sometimes it often can it doesn't make a lot of sense. And I really appreciate y'all walking us through those issues today. And hopefully we can get y'all to come back as session starts. Because we've got a lot, frankly, it's only October, so it's Florida. So we have no idea what may come up between now and January. And so there may be some new topics, but it would be great to talk to you all again, just to see how session is going and what kind of, what you all are seeing and kind of predicting as we get closer to session.
Yeah, I think a lot of folks in my world, they think about going to court first, and that's where I'm probably most comfortable. But the reality is that a lot can be accomplished in the legislative process and much more cost effectively than you might think. In fact, as litigation becomes more and more expensive, it's definitely something that businesses and individuals ought to think about because you can achieve a lot with a reasonable investment in the process that ultimately can redound not only to your own benefit, but to the benefit of others. So I want to thank our guest today, Beth Vecchioli, Kim Case. And I don't know about you, but I'm going to be looking for the Sandpiper Coalition when the debates begin over the Mockingbird and get behind that one. Some of our folks here today, maybe you have another bird you want to favor, but we'll be interested to hear about that. Thanks to all of you, most of all, for joining us today. Please plan to join us for our next Florida Capitol Conversations podcast. And also to my co-host, Mia McKown, thank you for joining us. I wish everybody a great day. Take care.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you for listening to Florida Capitol Conversations. For more information on our Tallahassee office, please visit hklaw.com/Tallahassee.